It was the trial that seized the attention of the world.
He's facing multiple molestation charges.
The King of Pop facing years behind bars.
It was so stunning that I thought, he's in big trouble.
But Michael Jackson's legal defense team pulled out all the stops.
The defense says, hey, it's not Jackson who was the predator, it was Jackson who was the prey.
It was a winning strategy. How did they do it?
We, the jury, find the defendant not guilty.
The trial of Michael Jackson sparked a media feeding frenzy that lasted for months. More than 1,000 reporters from nearly 36 countries pitched camp.
We, the jury, in the above entitled case, find the defendant not guilty of conspiracy.
It climaxed on the 13th of June 2005 with a stunning victory for Jackson on all counts.
We have a closet full of evidence that really made us always come back to the same thing. It was just not enough, you know.
I felt like we were really left in the dark about some things, and questions weren't answered, but we had to make do with what we had and the evidence that was given to us, and we did it.
And we came to the decision that, that pointed to reasonable doubt.
The scene of Jackson's triumph was a far cry from where the story began. In a remote compound, less than an hour's drive, and a world away from the courthouse. There, Jackson lived in a remote ranch, named after a place of childhood wonder. Neverland was a fantasy world that included an amusement park, zoo, and video arcade. Many children called it paradise, but others thought something sinister lurked in the shadows.
This world that is so opulent and beautiful, but paradoxically so strange and sometimes creepy. You know, it really is a reflection of Michael Jackson in many ways.
It was behind this slick veneer of childhood fantasy in Michael Jackson's cluttered bedroom that a crime was alleged to have taken place. A crime against a child.
It was so stunning that I thought, he's in big trouble.
In the end, the prosecution failed to prove its case, as some thought it would from the start.
I think this is a terribly weak case. I think it's weak with the evidence. I think it's weaker without it.
The case began on the 18th of November 2003, when police raided Neverland. The search yielded a wide-ranging collection of pornographic magazines and books from Jackson's office, bedroom, bathroom, and under his bed. Court observers felt the pornography was an important part of the prosecution's case.
I think it's significant because it creates an atmosphere, or the impression of an atmosphere.
On the 20th of November, Jackson was arrested as his private plane landed in Santa Barbara. And in April 2004, he was indicted on 10 counts, including lewd acts upon a child, administering an intoxicating agent to assist in a felony, and conspiracy. The life and career of the man who had so boldly labeled himself the King of Pop would now be put on the line inside a courtroom. These would be dark days for Michael Jackson, but it hadn't always been that way. Once he had indeed ruled the music world.
At Michael's peak, he probably was worth in excess of $500 million.
But Jackson also mystified fans with his increasingly strange behavior.
You look at his physical appearance and how it's changed over the years. And you see why people call him Wacko Jacko. When there was the story that he wanted to buy the Elephant Man's bones, there was a story that he would sleep in a hyperbaric chamber. Look where he lives. He lives in a theme park. How much stranger can you be? He calls it Neverland. He thinks of himself as Peter Pan. To say he's normal would redefine the word normal.
In 1993, a 13-year-old boy accused him of sexual abuse. This evidence would eventually become the centerpiece in the case against him.
I think if the judge had not allowed in the evidence of the prior accusations, you really wouldn't have seen much of a case here. It is the heart and soul of the prosecution's case.
The allegations in that case involved oral copulation, and that prompted the police to get a court order to force Michael Jackson to have photos taken, and they were compared, and they were dramatically very similar. There was certain blotch marks, certain discolorations on his penis, which basically the boy was able to identify. The implication obviously is, how could he have seen Michael Jackson naked but for a molestation or a situation that he shouldn't have been in?
In the wake of the 1993 accusations, Santa Barbara County prosecutor Tom Sneddon prepared to bring a criminal case against Jackson. But the singer reached an out-of-court settlement with his accuser for about $20 million.
Tom Sneddon was trumped by the civil settlement in 1993. I think he's really passionate about this case, perhaps too passionate, too close to this case.
I'm going to show you a photograph.
It's almost like the movie The Fugitive, you know? I think that he's been out to get this man, and he doesn't believe that there's the one-armed man out there. It's Michael Jackson's the guy he's been after.
I'm not one of these people that has a big problem with Tom Sneddon. This is a man who believes with all of his heart that Michael Jackson is a pedophile, and that he feels it's his job and his duty to do something about it, and be vigorous about it, and be determined about it.
The prosecutor's vigilance lasted nearly 10 years. In February 2003, suspicions that Jackson might be a sexual predator were raised when Martin Bashir's documentary, Living with Michael Jackson, was broadcast in America. The singer defended his practice of sharing his bed with children and was even seen holding hands with his eventual accuser.
That started a firestorm that led to this case, that Michael Jackson sleeps with children, he's a child molester.
Sneddon instigated an investigation which led to the charges filed against Jackson. After his indictment in April 2004, the superstar dismissed his lawyer, Mark Geragos, and hired a superstar in his own right, Tom Mesereau.
Tom is very methodical, very strategical.
Mesereau brought in a team of heavy hitters, including Scott Ross, the lead investigator for the Jackson defense team, and very experienced in high-profile cases. The elite team decided their focus would be to discredit the accuser's family.
What Tom was trying to do was set the stage for, this is who the family is. They're not credible, no matter how you cut it.
Mesereau's guidance proved crucial to Jackson when, after his arraignment, the singer jumped on top of his vehicle and performed for the crowd.
It shows a disconnect with reality to even do something like that, because he viewed it as an opportunity to put on a show for his fans and say, thank you for your support. And I think that it took Tom Mesereau, frankly, to bring him in, rein him in, and ground him.
On the 30th of January, the eve of the trial that would decide his future, Jackson posted a video on his website.
I deserve a fair trial like every other American citizen. I will be acquitted and vindicated when the truth is told. Thank you.
The following morning, the 31st of January 2005, jury selection began. Those 8 women and 4 men would ultimately decide that Michael Jackson was not guilty beyond a reasonable doubt.
You're hoping that maybe you can find a smoking gun or something that you can grab onto that says absolutely one way or another, and in this case, we had difficulty in finding that.
When the Michael Jackson trial began on the 28th of February 2005, prosecutor Tom Sneddon promised the jury shocking details. He would show them, he said, how one of the most famous celebrities of our day lured a 13-year-old boy into his web. He would detail how Michael Jackson seduced the boy with attention and gifts, how he showed him pornography and plied him with alcohol, all with one goal in mind, sex. It sounded like a compelling case, but whatever Sneddon intended, it backfired.
We expected probably better evidence, you know, something that was a little more convincing, and it just wasn't there, you know, just wasn't there.
Snedden began with a dramatic moment familiar to millions of television viewers, the now infamous documentary by Martin Bashir. The jury heard Jackson admit to having boys sleep over at his ranch and how it happened.
And then he finally said, "Okay, if you love me, you sleep on the bed."
The boy accuser himself appears in the documentary holding hands with the star and resting his head on Jackson's shoulder. When the day came for the accuser to testify about being molested, Jackson was more than an hour late, finally showing up, dressed, curiously, in pajama bottoms. With Jackson in court, the boy told how, after he was diagnosed with cancer, he met the pop star.
Michael Jackson came into his life. Michael Jackson. And then takes him into his heart and wants to be his family, wants to be his dad. His parents were divorced, and he didn't have a dad. And Michael Jackson says, "Call me Daddy."
But it was a relationship, the boy said, that took a sinister turn. He described how Jackson would get him drunk and molest him.
For the prosecution, the accuser, when he took the stand, was actually very good for them. He was composed, he told his story. The problem for them was when Tom Mesereau got a shot at him and really shook him up a lot.
He was a cancer survivor, and the defense couldn't really attack him. So basically, Tom just went about the business of slowly deconstructing his story.
As his tale unfolded, troubling inconsistencies emerged. The boy told a dean of his school that he wasn't molested. Was it a lie?
His story had changed over time. He had told cops at one point that he had been touched 5 times, that Michael Jackson molested him 5 times, then it was 7 times, then it was back down to 5.
I had a hard time believing him. I had a really hard time.
For the defense, the accuser was the biggest obstacle they had to overcome. Because if the accuser were to be believed, then the defense would lose. And so they were very prepared. Mesereau did a very excellent cross-examination.
He was just as deft with the only eyewitness, the accuser's brother. The brother said he saw Jackson masturbate while fondling the accuser. But again, key details were missing.
He couldn't remember whether or not, his brother had on clothes or didn't have on clothes, had on underwear, didn't have on underwear. Very key, important details. So that testimony, very fundamental to the claims of molestation, never lined up, never synced up, and I'm not sure whether the jury could ever reconcile that.
During the cross-examination, the boys began to look less sympathetic.
I'm sure Tom Snedden, in a perfect world, would have had the Hardy Boys as victims here, and he didn't. He had a very tough sell. He had victims who didn't act like victims. He had unsympathetic victims.
If the credibility there had not really been as big of an issue, that this is just conjecture on my part, but it could very well have swung the decision in the other direction.
The prosecution's case was floundering. But then Tom Snedden pulled off what many observers at the time thought was a decisive and potentially devastating coup. He convinced the judge to allow into evidence past allegations of child abuse that had been leveled against Michael Jackson. Allegations that would show the defendant had a history of molesting boys.
That was a major blow, and it created a case inside a case. So Jackson, suddenly, his people are defending a whole nother case. They're defending allegations from the early 90s and mid-90s that they really, in almost any other state wouldn't have to confront.
I think they were devastated. I think Michael Jackson was devastated. I was in Santa Maria. I saw Michael Jackson that day, and when he walked out of court, he looked like he had been absolutely blown away.
The new allegations began with testimony from a 24-year-old man. He said Jackson had molested him several times from the age of 7, mostly while they watched cartoons. The man recalled one time when Jackson was tickling him. He reached onto his leg, then reached up to his, quote, privates. He said that afterwards, Jackson had given him $100.
I mean, you could almost palpably feel the emotion in that courtroom when that young 24-year-old, the maid's son, we call him, testified.
He said that as a result of the molestation, he went through 5 years of therapy. And he said, with his wife in the gallery, that what he was saying on the stand, he had never told his wife, and he had never told his mom. It was very powerful.
As the jury soon learned, Jackson had done everything he could to keep the man's allegations quiet, including paying the man a settlement so he wouldn't sue.
I need an umbrella. Hey!
The 24-year-old man was just the beginning. Other witnesses started coming forward.
You could almost feel the emotional current running through the jury as they watched the mother of the 93 accuser testify.
The mother of a 13-year-old boy, whose 1993 lawsuit made headlines by alleging Jackson was a pedophile, recalled Jackson begging her to let her son sleep with him. When she finally said yes, Jackson gave her an expensive bracelet from Cartier.
The testimony of the 1993 accuser's mother was devastating. She testified that she hasn't talked to her son in 11 years. She testified to having Michael Jackson sleeping in that boy's bed in her home, in his bedroom, for 30 straight nights. All the mothers on that jury looked at this woman with such great contempt, but yet also such sadness, because she had ruined her life, and she looked like a woman whose life had been ruined. She just looked like a ghost on that witness stand.
A former Neverland security guard, Ralph Chacon, corroborated the mother's account and gave more shocking graphic details. He said he actually saw Jackson perform oral sex on the woman's son. Other Neverland employees added more examples of what they claimed was Jackson's method of seducing children. A maid said she'd seen Jackson kiss child actor Macaulay Culkin. A chef said he'd seen the singer's hand in Culkin's shorts.
All of these employees at Neverland say damaging things about Jackson, but the defense then is able to turn around and say, well, here's the motivation for that.
Many of the witnesses who came in to say that they had witnessed other alleged acts of molestation were then shown by the defense to have been disgruntled former employees, or who had filed lawsuits against Michael Jackson and lost, or who had tried to sell their stories to tabloids in the past. So everyone had an ulterior motive in this case.
Although the defense had punched some holes in the prosecution's case for Michael Jackson having a history of pedophilia, that wasn't the decisive factor for the jury.
We were instructed that if we found that Michael Jackson was actually guilty of molesting a child in the early 90s, that we couldn't automatically just then go directly to this case and say, well, therefore he's a child molester and he's guilty in this case. It didn't work that way.
She was so bizarre. She was so unlike other witnesses that you see in a regular trial that it was absolutely astounding.
And I practiced 23 years. I've never seen anything like it. I mean, like everyone's heads were spinning.
7 weeks into the Michael Jackson trial, prosecutor Snedden called his key witness the accuser's mother. Defense lawyer Tom Mesereau knew the prosecution was in for trouble.
The accuser's mother, Tom had said from the get-go, was our best witness. She's the type of person that will sort of change her story midstream. She will always make her story fit the facts instead of the facts fitting the story. And we knew that once she got cornered on the stand, that she would alter her story. She would start to make things up. And that's exactly what she did.
In a trial full of strange moments, this may have been the strangest of all. The mother of the accused took the stand and laid out an astonishing charge that there was a conspiracy to hold her family hostage at Neverland, a charge the jury never bought.
You know, if you listen to the testimony, you can pick out the inconsistencies and the untruths. that was kind of the biggest issue, I think, in the whole trial.
She was caught in so many lies and misstatements that it's then and there you could see the jurors saying, why should I believe this woman, and why should I believe a case that's based on this woman?
The mother claimed, among other things, that aides to Michael Jackson forced her to stay at Neverland. Surveillance video did in fact show that she was followed, and there was evidence that her calls were monitored. But mostly her testimony sounded far-fetched and paranoid, if not downright incredible.
She was just spinning the wildest stories that you have ever heard come out of a person's mouth, having to do with feeling that she was getting kidnapped, that her kids were going to disappear on a hot air balloon from Neverland, and that there were killers after her, and that she needed to appease the killers, and it was all kinds of crazy stuff was coming out of this woman's mouth, and Tom Mesereau wasn't objecting to anything. He was just letting her dig this hole deeper and deeper with each passing day. Then he went back in for his cross-examination, and he just pretty much destroyed her.
The real weakness that Mesereau pounded home is, you left Neverland. You left 3 times. You left and you kept coming back, and you were being held hostage. She had access to phones, and she never screamed out, hey, I'm being held hostage, somebody help me.
Mesereau also grilled the mother about a settlement she won in a lawsuit she filed against the department store JCPenney. Mesereau implied the mother was trying to win money from the pop star, the way she had with the store. But that wasn't all. Mesereau also presented evidence that she'd lied in the JCPenney suit. Jackson's strongest defense, that the accuser and his family were lying con artists out for money, began to take shape.
For the defense, the accuser's mother was a dream come true. I mean, she was centerpiece, Exhibit A. This is a family den of thieves, grifters, out to shake down Michael Jackson.
The overall reaction, I think, was just not a trustworthy family, that there was just too much evidence of trying to get something from somebody else.
You got to give the defense credit for really having a strategy from day one. And their strategy was to deflect attention from Michael Jackson and put it right back on the accuser and his family, and to make the bad guy the accuser's mother. And she was an easy target to do that. I think the biggest mistake for the prosecution was believing the mother and designing their whole case around her testimony.
The prosecution wrapped up its case with one of its strongest witnesses, someone who it seemed would offer a damning indictment of Jackson, Debbie Rowe. The mother of his 2 children was waging a custody battle with the pop star over permission to see her children.
I think the prosecutor was salivating, saying, look, if anybody hates Michael Jackson and will destroy him on the witness stand, it's going to be this woman. In fact, it turned out to be exactly the opposite. She was the best character witness Michael Jackson could hope for.
And what did she say? Michael Jackson's a wonderful person and a great father. That was the day the defense case officially began, and the rug was pulled out from under the prosecution, and the entire conspiracy theory seemed to just cave in on itself.
The general impression when the prosecution was done with their case was that they were basically struggling. I don't think anyone thought there was going to be a conviction at that point. They hadn't really proven their case.
Finally, after a disastrous 9 weeks of prosecution testimony, the defense found itself in the hot seat.
The suspicion going into this case seemed to be that this was Michael Jackson's case to lose.
They thought, I think, that they were playing with house money. They thought that they were ahead of the game.
But the defense, with its all-star cast of witnesses, would make its own mistakes.
The cardinal rule in trials is to underpromise and overdeliver. But in this instance, I think Tom Mesereau made the cardinal sin of overpromising, and in several very key areas, underdelivering.
At one point, the defense seemed to deliver too much, taking the jury uncomfortably close to the mysterious world of Michael Jackson's sexual appetites.
Pictures of naked boys, pictures of people in bondage, and basically brought it out and said, what do you think of a man who has pictures like these? Would you leave your kid?
In the early days of the trial of Michael Jackson, the prosecution tried to paint a picture of the singer that was disturbing, even horrifying. a sick man who preyed on boys in the seclusion of a sprawling home he called Neverland. The defense launched a surprising strategy that didn't deny Jackson's eccentricities, but instead exploited them. In the opening salvos of Michael Jackson's defense, his lawyers played the wacko card.
I think the weirder the better for the defense.
Defense lawyer Tom Mesereau led jurors on a rare peek into the imaginative world of the superstar.
He almost holds himself out like a messiah.
A messiah in his own promised Neverland.
Upstairs is a bed, and over the bed is a picture of the Last Supper, but Michael Jackson is depicted as Jesus.
One of his favorite pastimes is playing with young boys.
He loves children. The defense showed the jury what kind of person Michael Jackson is. A Michael Jackson who's not like the rest of us. You know, somebody who's sort of in this arrested childhood stage, but not somebody who's sexually oriented.
Michael Jackson may be bizarre, but the point Mesereau was making to the jury was, it's not a crime to be strange in America.
He's very honest and open about his upbringing, about the childhood he wishes he had had, and about why he thinks the world should spend more time devoted to its children.
Our concern was bringing out the truth. Strictly, let's tell the truth. If we can get the truth out there, we don't have anything to worry about.
Michael Jackson, the eccentric. That image was reinforced on the strange day when the King of Pop showed up for trial in his pajamas.
But Michael showed up looking completely stoned in his pajamas, and they practically had to carry him into the courtroom. And what a scene it was. You know, fans were crying. It was mad. It was crazy.
Jackson's lawyer took it all in his stride, even playing the event to his advantage.
Goes to see the judge, everything just went on business as usual. I don't know what kind of lawyer could pull that off. I mean, really, think about it. Your clients in their pajamas are going to get arrested, and he just sailed right on through it with dignity, absolute dignity. And the jurors saw him. You know, the jurors see this.
The jurors saw what Tom Mesereau hoped they would see all along.
Peter Pan, not a pedophile.
Someone who could easily be caught in a web of conspiracy.
The defense says, hey, it's not Jackson who was the predator, it was Jackson who was the prey. And the alleged victim and his mother were the predators. They saw an easy mark, they saw a guy who liked young kids and wanted to be around them, and they saw the money.
They had done it before, argued Mesereau. He brought to the stand newspaper editor Connie Keenan, who'd received a phone call from the accuser's mother.
Her son was ill with cancer, and they were losing their house, and they were losing their car because of the medical expenses.
Keenan felt sorry for the sick boy and eventually agreed to run a story. A few weeks later, the mother called again.
She said, you know what, we didn't make enough money from the first story. Will you run another story?
The mother's phone call prompted the reporter to carry out more research on the family. She was stunned and shaken to learn that the family was insured and their medical expenses had been covered all along.
It gives me goosebumps. It does. It does. That a mother would use her son to use her son's illness for their own gain.
The next time Connie Keenan saw the boy, it was on television in the documentary Living with Michael Jackson. Mesereau played outtakes from the film, which showed Martin Bashir ingratiating himself with Jackson.
But you know, he was just, oh, you're so wonderful with children. Oh, children love you so much. Oh, I love to watch everything you do. And here's Jackson, you know, gushing his heart out. And so part of it, you thought, Jesus, everybody that surrounds Jackson, take advantage of him? Everybody?
Not everybody. Former child actor Macaulay Culkin saved the day for the defense team by coming to court to testify that he'd slept with Michael Jackson frequently and was never molested.
This is not somebody saying, I saw something, but this is Culkin saying, you're talking about me, and I'm coming in here to tell you this didn't happen to me.
Other young men who shared the singer's bed came forward too.
And the other 3 men who were supposedly molested testified that they were not. That weighed a lot on me, that they were put out there as being molested and deny that.
With those witnesses on the stand, the prosecution seized the moment to reinforce its theory that Michael Jackson was a sexual deviant. With witness Wade Robson, the prosecution brought out Jackson's extensive collection of pornography.
He was shown a book, another book taken from Michael Jackson's house, with men engaged in sodomy, oral copulation, that type of thing.
And basically brought it out and said, what do you think of a man who has pictures like these? Would you leave your kids with this person?
And Wade Robson said, under his breath, looking down, yes, that would bother me. And it was a stunning moment that gave me a really sick feeling.
But the defense recovered, pressing on with attacks on the credibility of the accuser and his mother. Earlier in the trial, the mother had testified that she'd been held hostage at Neverland. Mesereau was able to produce a witness who'd in fact given her a spa treatment at that time.
Did she call for help? No. Did she tell the person at the spa that she was being held against her will? No. What did she do? She had a body wax.
She went on shopping sprees and even had dental surgery, never once mentioning that she was being held captive. The defense knew that its attack on the mother would stick, thanks to the work of Chief Investigator Scott Ross. He'd uncovered a grifter scheme in which the accuser's mother taught her children how to con money from people.
She taught them what to say, and they said it. They had typed out notes that they would come home every day from school, and they would read from them. These kids were taught to disarm people. There was a consistent statement made by almost every witness that had dealings with the family that these kids would come up and greet them with a hug. These kids would write cards, "We love you, you're like a big sister to us, can we come stay at your house?" This was a pattern that they had set.
When the kids procured money, says Ross, the mother would put it in a special bank account.
She was the only one that had access to it. She was the only signer. She was filtering money through it.
Throughout the trial, the defense successfully portrayed the accuser as an astute young liar, scripted by his mother. But some observers thought the strategy was flawed because it allowed the prosecutor to counter the charges with his most damning evidence against Michael Jackson. Late in the trial, he showed a videotaped police interview of the accuser, taken around the time of the alleged molestation.
And then you just see that pure tape of a kid-like, you know, reluctant to say anything. He's not cunning. He's not a grifter. He's not out for money, at least not in that tape.
For the jury, it was a powerful piece of evidence.
And that kind of turned my opinion around as far as how I felt about this case. You look at the accuser and you say, well, do you believe his story about being molested? And to me, it seemed very believable.
And from that moment, I thought that there was a seismic shift in the case. That the defense, which had been out in front and winning, was suddenly 4 feet deep in a hole that they had to find a way out of.
But the defense had one ace in the hole, a red carpet of celebrity witnesses who would say the accuser's family had tried to get money from them.
It never happened. I mean, Jay Leno testified that the family never asked him for anything. They never asked him for any money.
They talked about Chris Tucker, you know, being a stronger witness. He didn't have that.
Mesereau also hinted that he would put Michael Jackson on the stand. The press eagerly awaited the moment, but in the end, only videotaped interviews of Jackson were shown.
Well, I told the jury in my opening statement they'd hear from him, and they did. They heard hours of interviews with him in the trial on videotape. And at some point, I still thought of putting him on, but realized they had not proved their case, and they never were going to prove it. So we made a decision that it wasn't necessary.
The defense was able to have Michael Jackson talk to those jurors without the threat of cross-examination. And it was a brilliant move and a fortunate move for the defense. It's always a risky proposition to put anyone, especially Michael Jackson on the stand. This is a person, you could have a day with him just talking about his allegations of cosmetic surgery.
Despite its dream team of lawyers, the defense had suffered some major setbacks. But as most analysts agree, Michael Jackson's lawyers made far fewer mistakes than the prosecution.
They had so much in this case, the defense, ammunition on the family.
I think if you're the defense going into deliberations, you're about as happy as you can get and about as hopeful you can get that things are going to go.
One of the first things we decided that we had to look at him as just like any other individual, not just as a celebrity. And once we got that established, that we could go beyond that.
On the 3rd of June 2005, after 3 months of testimony, the jury began to consider the case against Michael Jackson.
I really think that it went rather smoothly for this kind of a high-profile case. We were all trying to come to a common ground and decide, based on the evidence, what's going on here.
As the jury deliberated slowly and carefully, the frenzy outside the courthouse raged on. Media from 33 countries camped outside waiting for the verdict. Jackson's fans kept up their vigil outside the courthouse and outside the gates of Neverland. Meanwhile, inside the Jackson ranch, the star and his family waited for news, while outsiders offered their own statements on the case.
He is exuding confidence and strength, though he has excruciating pain in his back. He expresses great confidence in this jury's capacity to be fair.
The wait was longer than many expected. But on Monday, the 13th of June, after 30 hours of deliberations, the jury made its decision.
In the People versus Michael Jackson case, the jury has reached a verdict. The verdict will be returned in open court at 1:30.
The Jackson family left the Neverland compound and drove to the courthouse. A dazed-looking Michael Jackson walked slowly through security. As soon as he entered the courtroom, the court clerk read the verdict.
We, the jury, in the above entitled case, find the defendant not guilty of conspiracy.
Not guilty on all counts. Moments later, while his fans cheered, the King of Pop left the court in silence. His lawyer said it all.
Justice was done. The man's innocent, he always was.
The decision was an enormous blow to District Attorney Thomas Snedden, who'd been trying to convict Jackson since 1993.
I've been a prosecutor for 37 years, and in 37 years I've never quarreled with a jury's verdict, and I'm not going to start today.
The jurors felt that Snedden hadn't given them enough to go on.
Actually, lack of evidence, I guess, was what we used to reach the verdict.
The evidence in this trial was not strong. The accuser wasn't good on the witness stand. His story had a lot of holes in it, and so did the story of his family. And I think jurors looked at all of that and said, we're not going to send a man away for many years to prison based on this family.
The jury had to look at the evidence and say, you know what, maybe he's done bad things in the past. Maybe he did bad things in 93 and 94 and 95, but we don't believe he did it this time. And that's really what we're being asked. Did he do it this time?
If you're accusing somebody of a felony, then, that person is entitled to be convicted without a reasonable doubt. This just wasn't the case where Michael Jackson was going to be found guilty of this, and that's not to say that he's an innocent man.
What it came down to in the end was that the jury did not trust the accuser or his mother.
I disliked it intensely when she snapped her fingers at us. That's when I thought, don't snap your fingers at me, lady.
The taint of the mother just rubbed off on this entire family. She was an unbelievable witness, and she basically ruined this case for the prosecution and for the family.
And what of the man himself, now that the trial no longer hangs over him?
Michael Jackson is a shell of the man that he was just 3 months ago at the beginning of this trial. this trial has taken such a toll on him emotionally and physically.
It's been a terrible ordeal for him. He's had trouble sleeping, he's had trouble eating. It was an exhaustive 5 months, and fortunately we came out ahead, and now he can rebuild his life.
But Jackson still has a host of problems that face him. He may face a civil suit from the same family or other accusers. He's also now involved in a custody battle over his children.
I think there's still a strong argument for removing the children from his care and custody. A lot less is needed to remove children than is needed to find someone guilty of a crime.
Jackson is now more than $200 million in debt.
Although he's been cash-strapped, which has forced him to borrow, he nonetheless is still really asset-rich. You know, if Michael were to go out and liquidate all of his assets after this trial, pay off all of his debt, he would still moonwalk away into the sunset with about $200 million.
That would mean selling his most prized assets, his share of the Sony ATV music catalogue, which includes the Beatles' songbook, and his showcase home, Neverland. Some observers think that should be the first to go.
Neverland is, I think, an albatross. A guy who's, who has gained this reputation, whether deserved or not, for being a person who has nefarious activity with kids. An amusement park is the last thing he needs.
Can Michael Jackson return to a musical career? Will he have an audience?
Michael will no longer be the king of pop. I think his fan base has diminished greatly as a result of these charges. I think there are a lot of people who will naturally be turned away from his music, no matter how brilliant it may be. But on the same token, I think there are also a lot of people who will stay around. Look, there are a lot of people who think all of this is one great conspiracy and still express their unwavering love for Michael Jackson and his music.
At the end of the day, it's all about the hits. It's all about a hit song. It's all about making a hit record. And if Michael can make a hit record, people will buy it. I do not think we've seen the last of Michael Jackson. I think that he has the ability, with the acquittal, to be a phoenix rising.
And if that was one of MJ's good outcomes, there have been plenty more that have questioned his common sense and beyond. His most shocking moments are on their way.